I'm sure it's in the emails that I sent back to you, but the reason I wasn't able to come is that normally, or for so many years, I would be teaching my class at this time of year. I've taken a break from teaching, which has allowed me to do things like come here, which I wanted to do from the very start. But now that I don't actually, after 24 years, I thought I'd take a break from having students. But what I brought today is actually geared mostly with students in mind. It's a sort of a collection of episodes from my career, particularly my early career, and it's mostly how I came to a kind of technique of self-teaching. It's mostly a story about getting things wrong and figuring out what to do with that, and sort of recognizing the potential that can come from making mistakes and picking up the pieces and figuring out what is a better way forward. So for this to make sense, I should give you a little bit of background of sort of how I started in this, where I came from, and all of our stories have multiple sort of origins, and for me, for this story that I want to give you now, probably the best place to start is here. It's not actually with these books, these stories. It's not with this lettering, but it's actually with this author, Edgar Wallace. Edgar Wallace was a writer, worked in England in the 1920s, wrote about something like 120 novels, mostly sort of trashy detective stories. Wrote about 10 stage plays, about a dozen screenplays, and worked as a newspaper columnist who was just writing constantly. He was also my great-grandfather, and he kind of set the bar for all of us in the sort of ridiculous output and overachievement. My father, on the other side of the family, is also a writer. He worked in the advertising business, literally on Madison Avenue in New York. And he worked on campaigns for various clients. He wrote what he called direct mail. The rest of us would call it junk mail. And his sort of one of his passions, one of the things he did to unwind, was to write the lyrics, the librettos for operas. His composer friends would be writing the music. He would be writing the words. This was his idea of relaxing on a weekend. This is a piece of his sort of stage version of the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And with this kind of context, for a long time, I thought I was going to be a writer. This is something I found in one of the old books. You can see I learned very early on the importance of editing your own work, writing something and throwing it out. The problem for me, though, was that I had fallen in love with abstract art. I wanted to be a painter as well as a writer, and I was certain that at some point I would have to choose one of these and leave the other behind. And I was really dreading the day that I would have to make this decision. And the kind of art that I wanted to make was based really heavily in mathematics. I would do pages of these sort of calculations in sort of working out a composition. I want to have that kind of grounding, and to me it was a kind of justification for what these compositions would look like. And one of my sort of heroes through all of this was Kazimir Malevich, and just what he was able to do, just the kind of worlds that he could create with just the simplest of shapes, just the colors, the arrangement, just how he could make so much out of so little. And also at the same time, with felt like the opposite end of the spectrum, from the totally abstract sort of celestial compositions to something very visceral and textured like Kurt Schwitter's. He's always been a great inspiration to me, and actually in retrospect, I realize now that this piece you see on the left, May 191, was something that kind of stuck in my head for a long time, and I couldn't really understand why, and eventually realized that it was just the way that this texture that you can almost sort of taste that it's so vivid. It's made entirely of letters. And so it would make sense that in the painting work that I was doing at the time, that letters and typography couldn't help but keep showing up. And as one last sort of component in this, music has always been a really important thing to me, and it was actually through music, specifically Cabaret Voltaire, that I came to know the work of Neville Brody, and it was in these records, which I originally bought for the music, that I came to know his work and started to understand the design of a letter form as a sort of an expressive proposition all by itself. Before it says anything, before it gets composed into anything, just the letter forms themselves are just a world to explore all by themselves. So I wanted to learn more about how to make letters, because I wanted to explore this world. I hadn't considered it so much before. So I found, I tried to find anything I could about designing letters, and there was exactly one book that I could find, which was this book, Lettering for Reproduction, which is the kind of standard issue for lettering artists in agencies, in advertising agencies, sort of Madison Avenue. And I remember seeing things like this and deciding and realizing that I could not do this. I did not have the patience or the discipline or just the manual control to make things like this. And I was wondering if actually I should just close this book and walk away. Then I found this. It was actually this page. It still has my notes on it. It describes the proportions of the sort of Roman inscriptional model in terms of squares and smaller squares and circles. And it was a language that I understood really well from the abstract painting that I was doing before. And I assumed that this was not someone's interpretation, but this was absolute law. This is the way these letters were made. And I felt like I needed that because I was sort of lost in this new world, and I wanted something as solid as I could get. So I was just going to assume that all of this was exactly correct and never changing. And not really understanding what I was doing, but just that I wanted to find out. I tried this. I think it's rather generous to describe this as a typeface because I didn't know anything about how to make something functional. These are really just 26 drawings that happen to be near each other. I was 15 when I did this, so at this kind of distance, it's hard to say exactly what I was thinking of doing here, but I just knew that I liked this, and that was enough for me to go with. Later on, I tried sort of more ways or sort of systems of building letters, not really understanding why things work, what they don't work. I can look back now and say, and understand that my ideas were sort of either cooperating with or conflicting with what the letter wants to do, but I didn't understand any of that. I was just kind of stumbling along and counting myself lucky if a letter came out looking okay. I should back up for a moment and give sort of a larger context. As I mentioned before, my father is in the advertising business in New York. And he was a writer. He wasn't designing anything. But still, I was always acutely aware of what advertising was saying, what it looked like, the assumptions it was making about the message and the audience it was speaking to. And I couldn't help but be also really acutely aware of just the typography and just what it tasted like. And so this is, in a way, kind of what my childhood kind of felt like. These weren't his campaigns. This is someone else's work, but still, this is what the atmosphere was. And this style, this sort of loud, garish advertising style, is something that I could not stand. I absolutely hated this. This stuff looks so ugly. I can't believe that this is like, for some people, this is back in vogue. It's ridiculous. But, and so when I got to art school, and this is me, I decided that, because there's this, nothing so natural as wanting to contradict your parents, I thought that as soon as I had the means within my power, I was going to make something that was the opposite of Madison Avenue and all this stuff that I grew up with. I wanted to make something that was built in history and stepped around, just ignored the current style. Except I didn't know what that actually meant. So I got a hold of this book, Daniel Berkeley Updike's Printing Types, is a sort of foundational work of understanding what Western typography is, and I read the entire thing, and I didn't understand it. So I had to read the entire thing again, and then only sort of understood it. But I understood enough to know that I ought to start at the beginning, and for Western typography, that means a text typeface in the Venetian style, sort of Nicholas Jensen. So still not really knowing what I was doing, I thought I would try to understand what these forms were made of. I made lots and lots of really terrible broad pen sketches, a number of only slightly better pencil drawings, not really knowing how to evaluate these or test them, because no one around me could tell me anything about what I was doing, but I felt, I could feel this sort of thing just really viscerally, and I couldn't leave it alone. I had to keep pursuing it. And even though in a lot of really frustrated moments, I just had to keep pressing on anyway, and just hoping that, trusting really, that I was going to find what I was looking for. And after months, had only a Roman lowercase, and it was bad. It looked kind of like sad and abandoned and just really unhappy, and I didn't understand why. And it took me years and mostly just sort of exposure to professionals like David Berlow that I came to work for, that I wasn't making any kind of compensation or acknowledgement about what it means to look at a letter, 6 inches tall, and what it means to look at it at 10 point on a page. I had no idea what optical scaling was, plus lots of other things, drawing skills that are going on here, and eventually was able to return to this and redraw it as what became Hightower, that was released for retail a few years later. And while I was still at RISD, one of my favorite places in the area was this bar that was near the school buildings, and I would go there and have a few beers and draw on bar napkins. And for one Christmas, I wanted to get a present for my brother, but I was broke. I couldn't buy him anything, but I could make him something. So I made him a typeface. I made a typeface for his band called Dolores. He mentioned that he didn't think that there was a typeface that quite fit the personality of it. So I made this weird, silly thing, and brought it back to the one piece of digitizing equipment that I could find in the school. Is for Icarus, and still not knowing what I was doing, I tried to make something out of it. And I was actually kind of surprised that this worked because still no one was able to. I had no instruction through any of this. And then I was sort of so excited by this process that I had forgotten until it was, but put in quite a lot of work, that I actually forgot a lot of things here. I actually forgot to do the numbers. I forgot to draw any kind of punctuation. And I was going to have to go home pretty soon and actually give this to my brother. And I thought, I know this idea well enough. I'll just make this up on the screen as I go. And it was terrible. And I just deleted all of it. I have no image of how bad these numbers looked. And the lesson out of this moment is that I can't really fake the origin of a shape. I can't sort of fill it in afterwards. I had to go back to the bar, get a beer, get a napkin, and draw these things out. I had to install the same, follow the same path. And that's what this sort of fully corrected version looked like. I had decided the capital letters just didn't look good in this style and tried to leave them out, but when this was released by Font a few years later, I was told that, yeah, you really do have to draw capitals for this. Can you go do that, please? But in my head, this is actually what this typeface looks like. After years of making collages in the Kurt Schwitter's sort of style of finding bits of ephemera on the streets, I had a number of these tickets from a parking garage in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. And I was really curious, sort of intrigued by the shapes of these numbers, which didn't really resemble anything else that I knew. And later on, after meeting David Berlow, I sold him on the idea of making a typeface that was based on these, to try to imagine what the rest of a character set would look like, because only these numbers ever existed. And he told me to go off and try that. And seeing that there's some kind of geometric framework under these shapes, I thought I would just go sort of crack that code, figure out what kind of geometry is underneath this, to figure out what the rest of the character set should look like, and spend a lot of time, drawing, redrawing, editing, annotating these geometric shapes, and then realized that I had successfully killed the thing that made this so intriguing in the first place, which is the sort of wobbly, smudgy, organic sort of nature of these drawings, and learned, a sort of powerful moment to put the ruler away and actually trust my own eyes and my own instinct that what made this appealing in the first place was something that I should remember. I should stop second-guessing myself and just draw and make what I knew was there. And this is what became Garage Gothic. The typeface was built from those numbers. And I showed this to Berlow, and he thought this was looking good, and I thought to make a retail product from this, there ought to be a bold weight of this. I say, sure, okay, yeah, that's great. I actually found a couple of tickets that have a slightly heavier weight to them. And I showed this to him, and he said, yeah, okay, that's all right, but that's not really bold. You need something you need something more weight than that. I said, okay, how bold is bold? I said this with a perfectly straight face. How bold is bold? They said, well, there's no really like rule about it. It's more than that. I'll tell you. So, no. I want a rule. I want, there's got to be some kind of. I got really angry about this, and I was kind of like surprised by how upset I was about this, and because I was in. I was in new territory here, and I didn't want to sort of wander around. I've been for years, so long, I'd wanted to do this for a living, and I didn't want to screw it up. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'm going to go back to the lab at RISD. I'm going to take measurements out of every typeface that I can find there, and I'm going to see what happens if I try plotting this out. The horizontal and vertical weights of all these different families, and discovered that, actually, Barolo's kind of right. There is no rule. It was one of those sort of awkward moments when you maybe perhaps you'll come to this later, and you realize, my parents were actually right about something. I don't really like this idea, but okay. And this was like a really important realization that's guided everything that's come afterwards, that there are, in fact, very few rules, but there are lots of trends that can guide you, can inform you. They just won't give you exact numbers. And that's what I happened to find here, was something that's very suggestive, just not very precise. So with that, I made a black, interpolated to bold, and that became my first release at Font Bureau. And it was a little while after that I started working on this. In my head was sort of this pet project that I kept almost starting, which was to take the lettering that was developed for American highway signs in the late 40s and early 50s, and make a printing typeface out of that. To me, it was kind of a joke. I don't know if anyone else was going to get the joke, but that's how I was thinking of it. Sort of like, a paragraph of text like dressed up as a highway sign. I thought that'd be kind of funny. And the challenge in this quickly became sort of remembering what I had nearly done to Garage Gothic, but sort of like killing it by over-rationalizing it. The challenge in what became Interstate was figuring out how to take what's Highway Gothic, was made in the 50s, which you see on the top there, which has a lot of weird things going on in it. Like weight is building up and curves move a little weirdly, and it's that project was came out of a collaboration between this academic, Dr. Ted Forbes, and a group of sign painters, and about someone's idea and someone's experience about what makes letters usable, and how to remove just enough noise from this to make it usable, but not so much that it stops being interesting. And there are a couple of things that I couldn't stop myself from trying to fix, and these moments here, whereas everything that I could imagine would say, like, these two moments ought to operate the same way. If one of these has a smooth join on the inside where the counter is drawn as a curve, or it's drawn as a hard corner, you can't really do both at the same time, just sort of chucked together in the same character set. And I tried versions where they were all made like one, or they're all made like the other. And I had that moment again where I was killing the thing that was making this interesting. So not really understanding why it would work this way, I left this sort of bit of noise in the character set, and built a whole family around that. I'm really good at second-guessing myself. It really takes some effort to turn that off. This was a sculpture and event that was made by Jean Tinguely in 1960 called Homage to New York. Built this massive mechanical sculpture that destroyed itself. And I really wish that I had been around to see this, because I absolutely love this idea of making things that destroy themselves as sort of like something that blows itself up, and you sort of watch it and observe as a way of investigating and sort of creating by destroying. And sort of that spirit was always in the back of my head, and it was what informed a lot of my final project at school, which ended up being 4 typefaces, many of which kind of deliberately break something in references to history or the process of reading. And after school, I kept going with this idea of trying to understand what reading actually is by making things that are in fact hard to read or subvert some assumption about how reading works. And one of them starts with this really sort of sloppy, lazy handwriting as its origin to make this. And sort of the idea here was I wanted to make letters that were really, in a sense, weak. Because I wanted to find out how to make letters strong in their identity, start by seeing what it would take to make them really weak. So this typeface appears to have 26 letters. It actually only has 11. And each one plays the role of 2 and sometimes 3 different letters in the alphabet, and it would be the context or your experience as readers that would tell you whether this little twiddly thing is a C or an E or an O, or this other thing is actually an I or a J or an L. And it has a lot of flaws in it, but it's really the idea of it is what I thought was the most sort of important part of this. I also enjoyed coming up with a name. I'm still a writer, so because of the way this plays on context, it's called Sum of the Parts. But because you only get 11 letters instead of 26, it's also called Sum of the Parts. There are a few other experiments that I want to show you. This is one where I was wondering how, what letters are actually made of, both in their shapes and in our perception of them. And I tried this. It was the 90s, so it's very noisy, grungy stuff. But I was really amused to come to this moment where you can try to call these sort of patches of noise and understand what could make them recognizable as letters. And if you just have sort of nothing really specific, but just kind of general suggestions of a movement this way and a movement that way and some kind of curve, you could actually get a letter out of that. This has the weird effect of being easier to read the smaller you make it, which is pretty unintuitive if you look at what these shapes are. Those among you that are wearing glasses, if you take them off for a moment, this may actually get easier to read. It also took a long time to make these letters, so this is what the whole character set was. And then also this idea, I really like, sort of in the spirit of things that are built to fail. I want to see if it's possible to make letters that look really clear and straightforward, do one little change to them, and realize that you could create something that looks like it's solid and it looks like it's clear, but it actually isn't, and keep sort of needling at your expectations of what letters are and what they contain and how they behave. So this is a lot of fun to make. So keeping in mind that I'm speaking primarily to the students here. So the conclusion for all of this is that there isn't one. I think learning is something that continues forever. And school is just where it sort of gets accelerated and it begins, but really it's your responsibility to sort of keep that going however you decide to do that. And even though I find it really uncomfortable, I've come to appreciate the state of not knowing how something works. It can be, not knowing something can be really frustrating, it can be sometimes embarrassing, but there's a kind of pull within that if you can recognize that and sort of harness it and let it pull you forward, that's what can sort of pull you, forward and outward and upward. So it's something to really savor. Thank you.